The red-haired lady looked at the approaching men and asked with a grin if it was time for her to go. The men looked at the young lady in bewilderment. Their commander-in-chief ordered them to bring out the empress. The guards led the empress to the place of execution. The empress knew that the end was not gentle, but, unfortunately, she could not do anything. She could only follow silently. The young empress was brought to the place of execution. As she walked to her destination, all the people whispered frantically. They said that she cursed the emperor. They claimed she was blinded by jealousy. The empress was brought closer to the emperor. He looked at her with contempt and said that she would be sent to the guillotine. He looked at her intently, without looking away. The emperor wanted to get rid of her quickly. Without rushing her, they took her straight to the guillotine. Previously, the emperor was her whole world and sun. But over time, everything changed. The emperor looked at the empress with contempt and asked if she wanted to say something final. The emperor looked at her intently. He was furious. The empress knew that she had to tell him something finally. She looked at the emperor and shouted with all her rage that she was cursing him. She knew that he was truly a heartless and cold-blooded hypocrite. The empress shouted in rage that it didn't matter at all whether she lived or not. She knew that even if her body was torn apart, she would still make him pay for all his sins at any cost. The empress looked at her husband and asked if he wanted to say something. Finally, she wanted to hear at least a few words. The emperor, without taking his eyes off the young lady, told the knights to begin executing the empress. The empress laughed with tears in her eyes, right in the emperor's face. She did not understand how she could love such a person without memory. In the last minutes of her life, the empress reasoned that if only she had a chance to start over. She passionately wanted to become an empress again, namely the most noble woman. She wanted to repay people in kind. After the execution, the emperor told his servant to see to it that she was buried properly, because despite all her sins, she was the empress of a large kingdom. The servant said he would take care of everything. The late empress's name was Alexandra. Her life was ruined after she married Cleo Gilmina von Race. He was the third son of the emperor. Alexandra did everything in her power to bring him to the throne. The young lady was not afraid to get her hands dirty with blood or abandon her morals. Even her parents, the Marquis and Marchioness, took upon themselves Cleo's crimes and were executed in his place. Thanks to countless sacrifices, Cleo was able to ascend to the throne. For such sacrifices, he loved and cherished only Alexandra, and he constantly idolized her as an empress. But, unfortunately, all that Alexandra received was the crown of the empress for the sake of decency and her husband's betrayal. The emperor's bedroom was always full of new women, but among them there was no place for the empress. After all, the situation only worsened as the young lady was accused of allegedly cursing the emperor. The emperor was whispered dirty rumors about his wife from the outside, after which the empress's young life ended at the age of 26. Alexandra hated the emperor because he trampled on her life. The maid approached her mistress and began to wake her up. She was surprised, since Alexandra dozed off on such a day. She looked at her mistress and asked her to get ready. Alexandra looked at the maid and did not understand what was happening. She called the maid by name. The maid smiled and said that everything was correct, and she was Penelope. Alexandra couldn't understand what was happening. Alexandra looked intently at the maid and asked what she was doing here. In response, the maid smiled, not understanding what her mistress was talking about, and said that she was her maid and would always be by her side. The young lady looked and did not understand the whole situation that was happening, since she knew that her maid had died after she became empress. Penelope was killed by robbers when she was 20 years old. Alexandra thought that maybe this was her afterlife. The maid went to the window and pulled the curtains. She looked outside the window and said that today was very good weather and a beautiful day. Alexandra looked at her maid and asked how old she was. The frightened maid did not understand what was happening and did not understand why her mistress was behaving this way. She looked at her mistress and said that she was 16 years old. The maid said that the lady herself organized the coming-of-age ceremony 2 months ago. Alexandra looked at the maid in bewilderment. Her words shocked the young lady. Alexandra knew that Penelope was supposed to die at 20. Alexandra looked at her maid and could not believe that she was now only 16 years old. In a trembling voice, Alexandra asked Penelope how old she was. She desperately wanted to know her age. The maid looked at her mistress and said with a smile that she was 21. Young Alexandra froze in place without saying a word. The stunned lady jumped out of bed and ran. Penelope was in shock, and could only scream after her. She shouted to her mistress that she shouldn't get up so quickly, as she might feel bad. Young Alexandra ran to the mirror and looked at her reflection. She was shocked and could only laugh. Alexandra looked at her maid and wanted to ask what day it was. She saw what outfit she was wearing today and realized that today was a day that could not be forgotten. She looked at her maid and asked if her wedding was today. Alexandra stood dumbfounded and looked at the maid. She couldn't understand that this was all really happening. She looked at her and said that according to her, she was now 21 years old, which meant that today was the day of her wedding ceremony with the third son of the emperor. Penelope only confirmed the mistress's words. She looked at her mistress and said that she seemed unwell today. Alexandra decided to immediately push her maid out the door and said that she was suddenly dizzy and asked her to go out for a while. The maid was shocked by her mistress's behavior. Alexandra was left alone in the room. She couldn't believe everything that was happening. She pinched her cheek because she wanted to check if it was a dream. Alexandra felt pain and realized that it was not a dream. She realized that she had returned to the past because she wanted another chance. She furiously wanted revenge on her husband. She did not believe that anyone had heard her prayers. She realized that if everything that was happening was true, then she should do something. But unfortunately, she didn't know what she should do. She understood that the wedding ceremony would soon begin, and if she wanted to escape, then she only had one chance. She sincerely hated the emperor. She remembered that she had vowed to ascend the throne again in order to become the most noble woman in her country, and to return to her husband all the humiliation and pain that she had once experienced. She realized that under no circumstances should she run away. She wanted to live her life again and take revenge. She knew that this time it would be her husband who would be beheaded, not her. Alexandra heard the maid's voice. She asked if she could come in. Alexandra allowed her to enter, and they walked in with a smile, as she wanted to help her mistress get ready for the ceremony. Alexandra asked her maid if she looked good today. She said with a smile that she looked just great on such a beautiful day. Penelope looked at her and said with a smile that she was the most beautiful in the whole world. Another maid came into their room and said that everything was ready, and it was time for them to go out. Alexandra just sighed and said nothing in response. She knew that she needed to control herself no matter what. Her inner self asked if she was confident that she could change the future. She asked herself whether she could put on a mask and play her role, knowing who her future husband really was. Her little demon asked if she was sure that his head would be cut off, not hers. She told herself that she needed to forget everything and just run away, and later find herself a suitable husband and become happy. Her little demon was whispering to her that she didn't have to be his wife. The demon said that there are many other ways in which one can take revenge. Alexandra didn't understand how she could forget about everything and just start living again. She still had the feeling of a cold blade that cut her neck. Going to the ceremony, she knew that everything was happening as it had once been. Everyone looked at her without taking their eyes off. The guests present looked in awe at the beautiful young bride. Young Alexandra knew what she had to do and confidently walked towards her goal. She saw her future husband and thought with a smile that everything was just beginning. The young man looked at his future wife and said that today she is very beautiful as ever. He gave her his hand. She looked at him and smiled and said he was great today too. The Holy Father looked at the young bride and asked if she swore to remain faithful and sincere to her husband. She replied with a smile that she swears. In turn, the Holy Father asked the young man whether he vowed to love, be faithful, and sincere to his future wife. The young man said with a smile that he swears. Alexandra knew that her husband was lying, since he betrayed her and killed her in the future. She furiously wanted him to be punished immediately in some way. She didn't understand how he could swear. Cleo touched his wife tenderly. Alexandra knew that she would never trust him again, and there would be no love or faith between them. They merged in a passionate kiss, but Alexandra knew that she would hate him all her life and curse her husband. She desperately wanted him to suffer as she had before. The Holy Father declared them husband and wife. All the guests present were happy and sincerely congratulated them on this day. Young Alexandra accepted congratulations and knew that today she would begin a completely different life. She knew that from today, the curtains of her new play were opening. One of the ladies present sincerely congratulated the young bride. She said that Alexandra should be very happy that such a person as Mr. Cleo himself became her husband. Alexandra said with a smile that she was very happy to be married to such a man. Another girl approached her and said that she had heard that the emperor had proposed to the third prince, and she also added that young Alexandra must be in great pain. Alexandra knew that the girl was undoubtedly right, since she had once fallen in love with Cleo first and then invited him to marry her. She was stupid, since there were 3 princes, but she chose Leo. Young Alexandra looked at the girl and said that she did not think that there was anything shameful in this, that the girl herself offered to marry her. Alexandra sincerely did not understand why she chose him out of all the imperial persons. The young girl froze with anger, and behind her the young ladies continued to admire Alexandra. They kept saying how incredibly beautiful she was. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young man. He looked at his wife and said that he had finally found her. Alexandra turned around and smiled tenderly at her husband. Alexandra said that she would like to chat more with the guests. Of course, if he doesn't mind. Cleo looked at her and snowily said that she was a real star today and asked if he had interrupted her fun. Alexandra looked at him and said with a smile that she really wanted to meet him, and he didn't interfere with anything. The young ladies said with a smile that they were so jealous of Alexandra, since she was having a truly wonderful day today. Alexandra, in turn, just smiled at them. Cleo called his wife. She looked at him in surprise, because she did not understand what he wanted from her. Cleo looked at his wife and asked if she would like to dance with him. Alexandra said that she would be happy to dance with him. She knew that she had to play a role in order to cast off the destructive hatred that gripped her soul. She knew she had to be a pure girl drowning in love. Cleo looked at her and asked if she was tired today. Alexandra said with a smile that she was not the least bit tired, since she was very happy. In turn, she asked if he was tired. Cleo looked at his wife and said that everything was fine with him as long as she was around. He was incredibly happy. Alexandra knew that everything he said was pure lies, but she also knew that there were times when they were happy. He looked at his wife and asked if everything was okay with her, as the color of her face had changed dramatically. Alexandra said that she simply remembered her mom and dad and imagined that she would live separately from them, and she suddenly felt very lonely. Cleo looked at her and said that the Marquis and the Marquise could come to them more often, and they could also go to them in their own time so that she would not get bored. Alexandra said with a smile that he was undoubtedly right, and despite all this, she was looking forward to life in the palace. Alexandra knew that the imperial castle was truly beautiful, but at the same time it was fraught with poison. Cleo looked at his wife and said with a smile that he would only protect her. He asked her to trust him. Alexandra knew that he was lying to her, and she would never be able to trust him, since he had already betrayed her once. But she looked at him with a smile and said that she trusted him completely. He looked at her and said that, unfortunately, the music had already ended. And also, after the reception, he needs to pay a visit to the Marquis and Marquise. He asked her to be patient a little, since soon everything will end, and she will be able to rest a little. Alexandra looked at him and said that she could handle it, and everything would be fine. Cleo approached her to tell her something else. He came very close to her and told her to wait for him tonight. The girl was very excited, because she had forgotten about the first night. Cleo looked at her and asked if she could be alone for a while, since he needed to say hello to the other nobles. Alexandra looked at him and said that she would wait for him, and he could calmly go. Alexandra recalled that her first night with him took place after the wedding. He kissed her and told her that he was leaving, but would be back soon. Alexandra was extremely scared, because she knew that she would not be able to sleep with him. She was already ready to die of horror from just one kiss, and the thought of such intimacy drove her crazy. Alexandra was frantically frightened and did not know whether she could escape the first night. She told herself to think because she knew there had to be some option. Alexandra called her maid. The maid happily ran up to her. Alexandra looked at her maid and asked if she sometimes takes sleeping pills. The frightened maid said that she had insomnia and needed to take it. She didn't understand why the lady was suddenly asking such a thing. Alexandra asked with a smile if she could lend her sleeping pills for just one day. The maid said in a trembling voice that she, of course, could lend her something, and in turn she asked if the lady had insomnia. Alexandra looked at her maid and said that lately she had trouble sleeping and felt very tired. She asked again if she could bring sleeping pills. The maid said that she would bring everything now, and Alexandra also asked not to tell anyone about this. She smiled at her and said that she didn't want to bother anyone with her problems. The young girl smiled and said that everything would be fine, since she would not tell anyone anything. The maid left, and Alexandra looked after her. She knew that with the help of sleeping pills, she could come up with her plan of action. She knew that as long as she had sleeping pills, her night should pass without incident. Alexandra stood alone, and suddenly a man approached her. He asked where her husband had gone and why she was left alone. Alexandra was excited because she remembered the man's voice. Alexandra turned around. The woman looked at Alexandra and greeted her and asked why she was here alone. She was interested in where the prince had gotten himself. Alexandra looked tearfully at her parents. The Marquis and Marquise looked at their daughter with a warm smile. They were sincerely glad to see her. Her father looked at her and said that she was almost a princess, so that they needed to communicate formally since they could not afford informal communication. Alexandra looked at her father and said that when they are alone, they can communicate informally since no one can hear them. Alexandra threw herself into the arms of her parents and said that she was very glad to see them. She sincerely missed them and was very glad to see them alive. Alexandra knew that this time she would not allow them to be sacrificed. The father looked at his daughter and asked if she was okay. He was worried about her and wanted to know if anything had happened. In turn, Mother said that she was not as usual today. Alexandra looked at her parents and said that she just missed them. Her father smiled at her and said what they saw this morning. He was sure that if other people saw them, they would think that they had not seen each other for a year. The man looked at his daughter and asked if her husband had neglected her. Alexandra said with a smile that she just suddenly got bored and nothing more. Her father looked at her and said with a smile that it seemed to him that she had already grown up, but looking at her, he saw that she had become and yet remained such a sissy. Alexandra looked at them and said that she wanted to tell them something. The Marchioness looked at her daughter and asked what happened. Alexandra asked in a trembling voice if they would always be on her side. The Marquis looked at her and said that they would always be on her side, since they were her parents and could not betray their beloved daughter. The Marquise, in turn, said that they would always be with her. Alexandra bowed her head to her parents and asked them not to sacrifice everything, including themselves, for her sake. The Marquise was surprised by her daughter's words. She approached her and, with tenderness and warmth in her voice, asked why she was suddenly saying such things. She frantically wanted to know what happened to her daughter. Alexandra knew that in the past, in order for her husband's coronation to take place, because of her stupidity, her parents sacrificed themselves. She fiercely wanted to protect her parents so that they would not do the same thing again. She wanted them to live and enjoy life. She was afraid that they might die because of her stupidity. Alexandra said with a smile that everything is fine, but she just says this because she never knows what can happen. She said with a smile that she just wanted to ask them not to sacrifice themselves for her, since she didn't want that. The father was confused and did not understand why his daughter was saying such things. He looked at her and said that they would definitely listen to her words, so that she doesn't need to worry about everything. Her mother also said that her father is right and she shouldn't worry. Alexandra exhaled and with a smile thanked her parents for their understanding. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Cleo. The prince came closer to them and said that he was surprised that they were here, since he was looking for them. Alexandra was there and saw him coming. She gave him a sweet smile. She understood that she had to play her part, but she also knew that he was already annoying her, and she wanted to get rid of his company as quickly as possible. The Marquis and Marchioness bowed and greeted His Majesty. The prince was a little embarrassed and said that he was embarrassed when his father-in-law called him that. The prince looked at them and asked with a smile if they had come to meet their daughter. The Marquis said that they would like to see her, but since they had already talked, they would already be returning home. The prince looked at them and asked if they would like to stay a little longer. The Marquis, in turn, said that they would not want to cause inconvenience to the newlyweds. Alexandra looked at him and did not understand why the prince was interfering with such a small happiness. The Marquis looked at the prince and said that he knew that his daughter was not the best, but asked the prince to take care of her. Cleo was confused. He did not understand why the Marquis could talk about his daughter like that. The prince said that his daughter was the best, wisest, and most beautiful girl in the entire empire. The prince said that he was honored to have such a woman as his wife. The Marquis, in turn, thanked the prince for such words addressed to his daughter. He wished them a bright and happy life. The prince said with a smile that he, in turn, would make young Alexandra the happiest woman in the empire. Alexandra, in turn, with anger in her soul, but with a smile on her face, said that she would try to do the same. The Marquis said that he was very glad to hear such words. The Marquise, in turn, said that they would then be calm. Alexandra looked at her husband and said that it was time for them to greet their majesties. As she left, Alexandra looked at her parents and silently asked them for forgiveness for what they had to endure. She frantically asked for their forgiveness, since she knew that she was unlikely to be respectful to her daughter, but she knew that no matter what, she would survive, and would take revenge for their past deaths, and for her simply past deaths. Alexandra knew that she had to be strong and take revenge for all the pain that was caused to her. She knew that the real beginning was yet to come. They came to an audience with the Emperor and Empress, bowing and greeting them. Reyes appeared before them in all his majesty. The king greeted his guests and said that the preparations for the wedding must have been a lot of trouble. Alexandra, in turn, smiled at the king and thanked him for his concern. The king looked at her and asked with a smile if there were any inconveniences during the ceremony, since he heard that she was preparing in her own way. Alexandra knew that his words sounded very funny, since he said such things even though he himself never had any special feelings for his sons. Cleo looked at his father and said that his care and attention made the ceremony wonderful. He thanked his father again for his kindness to them. The king looked at Alexandra and said that she was such a young princess, so it was quite possible that she would feel confused in the palace. Alexandra wanted to say something to the king, but the young lady interrupted her. She looked at the king and asked with a smile why he thought Alexandra was young. The young lady said that she in turn became an empress when she was only 3 years old. Alexandra looked at her angrily, because she knew that it was Empress Telsia. Alexandra knew that at one time the empress was the last obstacle to making Cleo emperor. She also knew that the person was by no means an easy opponent. The empress in her past life looked down on Alexandra, and she knew that she was her enemy. Alexandra greeted the empress with all respect and said that she looked simply beautiful today. Alexandra looked at the empress and said with a smile that she was completely overcome with excitement just from the fact that she had become a princess, and the empress at the same age played the role of the mother of all the inhabitants of the empire. Alexandra said that the empress had great respect for her. Alexandra looked at the empress, but she only grinned and did not answer. She knew that she was back to square one, just as she knew then that she needed to somehow clear up her doubts. The empress said that the princess would soon get used to her new life in the palace. The empress ruled the entire palace, and the princess had complete control over the palace in which she would soon live. The empress said that the princess would succeed. Alexandra bowed her head in honor and said that she thought that she was still inexperienced and was not sure whether she was ready to occupy such a respectful position. She was worried about possible misunderstandings of some points. And so she asked the empress if she could turn to her for some recommendations. The empress smiled and said that she could contact her at any time. The empress smiled and said that they thought it was so impolite to detain the newlyweds so that they could leave them. The young people thanked them for their kindness and moved away. Cleo looked at his wife and asked if she was okay. Cleo looked at her with some excitement and asked if the empress's attitude towards her was at fault. Alexandra knew that her husband was such a stupid person. She said with a smile that everything was fine, and she didn't think at all that the empress meant anything bad. What hurt Alexandra the most was his attitude. Alexandra looked at her husband and said that in the position of the empress, it is quite natural that she should keep them in check, since the situation with the issue of succession to the throne has not yet been resolved. He is a principal, and she is a girl from a simple family. The king had his first son with Empress Vincentia, the second son from Empress Telsia, third son from the deceased second empress Cleo. Alexandra knew that not only princes, but also their mothers were fighting for the place of heir, and she threw herself into the center of this whirlpool because of their desires. She knew that she might seem crazy or might look stupid, but she knew that she could do anything for her own good. Princip looked at his wife and asked if he could protect her and survive himself. Alexandra knew that she needed to go through everything. She said with a smile that he could do everything and everything would be fine with them. She said that he would protect her and she would protect him. She knew that she had to do everything so that he could be emperor. She looked at her husband with a warm and tender smile and said that they would definitely survive. Alexandra knew that she had to survive in order to take revenge on him. She knew that at the moment of her triumph, she would present a blade to his neck. Alexandra knew that this would be the most cruel betrayal against the highest. Alexandra looked at her husband and said that they needed to throw away all worries and go to Jen's palace. She said today was a very hard day for both of them. He looked at her and with a warm smile asked if she really wanted this. In turn, Alexandra said that she wanted this and she would like to go to the palace as soon as possible. She knew that her grand plan would soon come to fruition. The newlyweds arrived at the palace and were greeted by their new servants. Alexandra, in turn, smiled at the Meadows and said that she was very glad to meet, and she also introduced herself. She knew that the palace had once been the home of the third prince and his family before the emperor's death. She knew that the maids served her faithfully until she achieved her goal. Cleo looked at her and asked his wife how she liked the palace. Alexandra looked at him and said with a smile that she really liked the palace. Be that as it may, she liked the palace much more than he did, despite his betrayal of the palace maids who worked for her until the very end. Alexandra looked at her husband and said that he was probably tired. She said it was time for them to go to their rooms. Alexandra smiled and said that she would just take a swim and would wait for him. He looked at her with a smile and said that he would definitely come to her. Cleo looked at his wife and kissed her tenderly. He was looking forward to the night with her. The prince left, leaving his wife alone. She saw him off with a smile. As soon as he left, her expression quickly changed. She knew that she would soon be able to implement her plan of action. The maids said that they too would go to begin preparations. Alexandra felt very terrible. She desperately wanted to end everything quickly. Entering the room, she saw a truly beautiful sight. The beauty and grandeur of the room's decorations beckoned. Looking at the splendor of the room, she knew it looked amazing. The maid said that she did not know her tastes, but tried to do everything in an elegant style. She said that if she didn't like something, she just needed to tell the servants, and they would change everything. Alexandra said that everything turned out just great with her maid, and she liked everything. She called the maid by name. The maid was surprised. She said that she had not given her name, and, asking for forgiveness, asked how the lady knew her name. Alexandra was embarrassed, and said that she heard the name from the prince. The maid quickly changed her face at the answer she received, and she smiled back at the lady. The maid looked at her mistress and said that she dared to decorate the room in a color that was similar to the color of her hair. She asked if this option suited the lady. Alexandra said that she liked everything and was very pleased. The maid smiled and said that Alexandra should not be so formal with her. Alexandra smiled and said that she just hadn't gotten used to it yet, but as soon as she got used to it, she would gradually change. Alexandra looked at the maid and said that the prince should come to her soon. So she needs help with cooking. The maid looked at her and said with a smile that they would do everything, and first they would bathe her, and other people would do the rest of the preparation. Alexandra smiled and thanked the new maid. Alexandra knew that to the servants, she was just a young lady who was excited about her wedding night with her husband. Nothing more, nothing less. Alexandra knew that the servants had no idea what thoughts were surrounding her. Alexandra knew that she would be safe for the time being. The maids slowly prepared their mistresses. She was excited and worried about the night, but she knew she couldn't sit idly by. After all the preparations, she and the maid went into the room. Alexandra looked at the maid and said that she would like to be alone to calm down. She politely asked the maid to leave her. The servants understood her frantic excitement, smiling. They left her alone. They knew how important the first night was for a young lady. Alexandra looked at the glass of wine and knew what she had to do. Alexandra did not intend to deviate from her plan. She sincerely hoped that everything would work out for her. She hurriedly ran to the glass and poured the sleeping pills into the glass. She was very worried and didn't want anyone to see her. She was very worried and fearful, but knew that there was no other option. She was looking out the window in order to calm down and concentrate on the difficult night, when suddenly she was informed that the prince had come to her. She knew there was no turning back, and she waited with trepidation for her husband's arrival. She saw the prince enter. He was glad to see her. Cleo was looking forward to his first night with his wife. The young prince, smiling, walked towards his wife. He desperately wanted to take possession of her. She looked at her husband and realized that she had to put on the mask of equanimity again. Alexandra knew she had to play her role as a diligent wife. Alexandra looked at her husband and knew that she just needed to be patient a little. She told herself that she had to endure so that this would not happen. Cleo looked at her and asked if she had ever had a night like this before. He desperately wanted to take possession of her. Alexandra smiled and said that he was absolutely right. She looked at him and with a smile offered to sit down and drink wine. Alexandra was looking forward to him drinking with her. She looked at him and calmly took the glass to drink some wine. He followed his wife. Alexandra smiled and said that she could not believe that they had become husband and wife. She said with a smile that it must be just a dream. She knew that this was a very bad dream for her. The prince said that he also could not believe that this was reality, because when she invited him to marry her, it seemed to him that he was sleeping. She smiled and said that she was very embarrassed when he said that. Alexandra smiled and said that she was very worried. The young lady was very afraid that the prince would refuse her when she said this. Cleo looked at her and said that he would never dare to reject such a beautiful and smart girl like her. He looked at his wife and said that the fact that she chose him was the happiest event in his life. Alexandra looked at her husband and realized that for him, this was definitely the happiest event in his life. But for her, it was a crazy failure. For all the time, only she stained her hands with blood and did all the dirty work for him. And all this was only for the sake of words that he could hardly utter. She smiled and said that she considered herself incredibly lucky to have such a wonderful man come into her life and become hers. She said it was just great that they could spend their lives together. Cleo said sadly that life in the imperial palace is not so calm, and sometimes difficulties will arise. But he also added that no matter what, he would protect her and save her from any difficulties. Alexandra looked at him, dumbfounded. He looked at her and said again that he would definitely protect her. He looked at his wife with warmth and said that to prevent this from happening, he would protect only her alone, despite all the adversity around her. Cleo looked at his wife and asked if she believed him. Alexandra hesitated and said that she undoubtedly believed him. She remembered her past life, did not understand that at that moment she trusted him. From the bottom of his heart, he promised that he would certainly protect her and that he would love her forever. But unfortunately for her, he has changed a lot. Alexandra, in turn, did not understand why he could give it to her so easily. She looked at him and said that she believed him and would always believe him. Looking at him, she didn't understand why he had changed so much. Cleo looked at her and was perplexed. He didn't understand why his wife was crying. Alexandra realized her mistake, but unfortunately, she could not do anything, as tears flowed in a stream. She knew she didn't need those feelings anymore, but she couldn't calm down. The young man approached his companion in order to calm her down. He came closer to her, wishing that he would never cry again. He came even closer to her, and with all tenderness and warmth began to wipe away her tears. His desire to possess her overpowered him, and he kissed her with all passion. Alexandra was shocked by this. She did not want and did not expect him to kiss her. She didn't expect him to start pestering her so quickly. She did not want this at all and wanted her plan to come to fruition as quickly as possible. She knew that she just had to be patient a little and it would all be over. Cleo, in a fit of passion, picked up his wife. Alexandra was shocked by everything that was happening. Cleo threw his fragile wife on the bed. She was shocked by such rude behavior of her husband. He looked into her eyes and whispered tenderly that he loved her. But she knew that all his words were lies. Alexandra was disgusted by his touch. She hated them for everything he had done to her. While Cleo was satisfying her needs, she cried. She didn't frantically wish for it to end as quickly as possible. She didn't love him. Alexandra didn't know whether he whispered such tenderness in her ear from the pure heart, but she knew that he was arrogant. She felt bad from his hugs. She hated the thought of him touching her. She sincerely hated him and wanted him to fall asleep as soon as possible, since she could not tolerate such humiliation for herself for a long time. A few moments later, he fell asleep. Alexandra sighed with relief. She was glad that she could finally take a break from his company. Alexandra threw his sleeping body aside and walked over to the bedside table. She took out a knife and cut her leg, scarlet drops of blood flowing onto her bed. Alexandra looked at him with contempt. She knew that she could deal with him here and now without much difficulty. Alexandra was anticipating reprisals against him. She could simply kill him in her own bed. She bent over his body, knowing that a simple, easy death would not satisfy her desire for revenge. She knew that she needed to be patient a little in order to carry out her true plan of revenge. Alexandra put the sword in the nightstand. She knew her revenge was just beginning. Early in the morning, the principal woke up. He was confused and didn't understand what had happened. The young wife lay next to him and smiled. He was confused because he had a headache. He was confused and did not know how to talk to his wife. Having come to his senses a little, he saw his wife lying next to him, smiling back at him. She asked him with a smile if he was awake. The prince looked at his wife and asked what about yesterday. The young lady asked with a mischievous smile what he wanted to know. The prince was much embarrassed and said that everything was in a fog in his memory. All he clearly remembered was that he entered the room. He was confused and asked if it was just him. Alexandra just laughed. The prince was confused. He did not understand why she was laughing. He desperately wanted to know what happened yesterday. Young Alexandra looked at him with a playful smile and asked how she could not laugh. She looked at him and said that she couldn't believe that he didn't remember how he sweated last night. She said with a grin that he should be ashamed that he didn't remember everything. Leo looked at his wife and asked for forgiveness, as he was very embarrassed. He looked at her and asked if he had told her one thing. Alexandra was a little embarrassed and asked what he should have told her. He looked at her and said that he loved her. Alexandra was shocked. She didn't expect him to say such words. He hugged his wife and told her again that he loved her. Alexandra was confused by her husband's words and only quietly whispered that she loved him too. She didn't know whether it was a pretense or the truth. Alexandra didn't know whether he had been using her from the very beginning or whether his feelings for her had cooled over time. She firmly told herself that it didn't matter and she wouldn't stop her revenge. She knew she had no choice and she was willing to go all the way. She looked at him and said with a playful smile that it was time for them to get up as they had to greet the emperor and empress. The prince was embarrassed and said that she was right and they needed to get ready. The prince saw blood on the bed and, stunned, asked her if she was okay. Alexandra was confused because she didn't expect him to ask her, but she answered with a smile that he had been very affectionate last night. She knew he shouldn't worry, since there was nothing between them and he did nothing to her. Cleo looked at her and said that as soon as they said hello, they would immediately go to rest. She looked at him and with a playful smile said that she would do as he said. Little by little they began to gather. She had mixed feelings, since this was once her beloved husband, but she still remembered all the pain he caused her. She knew that slowly, but very painfully, she would pay him for everything he had done to her. Alexandra and her husband arrived at the palace. She saw all the splendor and grace of all things, but she also knew that behind the deceptive attractiveness there were sharp blades. She greeted the emperor and empress with a deep bow. The emperor and empress were glad to see the newlyweds. They looked at them and smiled silently. The woman looked at the newlyweds and asked if they had a good night's rest. Alexandra bowed and said that thanks to his and her majesty, she was able to rest properly, and she also thanked them for their attention. The high-ranking lady looked at the newlyweds and said that she had not done anything special, but was glad to hear such nice words from the newlyweds. This was the first prince's natural mother, Empress Vincentia. Alexandra looked at the empress and did not understand how she could look so affectionate. Alexandra knew that she had been fooled by the sweet smile in the past, but now she looked completely false. The emperor looked at Alexandra and said that it looked like they would soon hear good news. Stunned, Alexandra looked at the emperor and did not understand what he was talking about. The empress looked at the emperor and said that it was too early to talk about anything, since the first and second prince had not yet married. The emperor was surprised by such a statement. The young woman looked at him and said that the princes were still young, so there was no need to rush them. Alexandra looked at everything that was happening and realized that the high-ranking gentlemen were playing their roles very well. But she knew that they would not deceive her with such behavior again. The black-haired lady looked at the empress and asked when the first principal planned to get married. Alexandra knew that the first prince was now 26 years old, but considering that most nobles marry before 20, he was pleased with such a belated date. The empress said that she was afraid that she would never have time to see the wedding. The empress looked at her opponent and asked with a smirk on her face if her ideals were low. She, of course, understood that the royal princess, as her mother, would be more picky. Empress Vincentia was Duchess of Igalel. However, her mother was a princess of the kingdom of Laufez. Usually, such a marriage is not problematic. However, in the Reyes Empire, where pure blood is valued, mixed blood nobility are not welcome. So, for the queen, who from an early age experienced enormous feelings of inferiority, the topic of motherhood was very delicate about her birth. Of course, Empress Tarsila, who is one step higher than her in status and position, did not care at all about this. Empress Vincentia said that the first prince must be having a hard time because of such a stepmother who is not able to keep her mouth shut. She said that she hoped that he would find himself a beautiful princess, and she would put a lot of effort into her search. Empress Tarsila asked with a grin whether the first prince should marry before the second. She said that the order was completely wrong, and it must be very awkward. Empress Vincentia angrily asked if the second prince had a girl he could marry. Empress Tarsila said that for now the prince does not have a second half, but still she is very worried about the first prince. The empress with a grin told her opponent to let her know when he has someone, and if not, it was necessary to start searching immediately. The emperor could not resist and said that he did not think that this was something worth talking about now. The emperor looked at the newlyweds and said that they could already go to rest. The emperor looked at the young princess and said that she now needed to adapt to her new life in the imperial palace. The young people bowed politely to the emperor and hastily left. Alexandra knew that they had not changed at all, since their quarrels had been like this in the past. She was very tired of such squabbles. The young prince looked at his wife and realized that the whole situation had exhausted her. He came closer to her and asked if she was okay. Alexandra hesitated a little, as she did not expect such a question, but with a smile, she said that she was fine. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him. The young lady froze in bewilderment. She did not understand what he wanted to do and was afraid of him. He looked at her with a warm smile and told her not to get caught up in him talking about children. He knew there were no ulterior motives in his father's words. At that moment, for some unknown reason, when she heard his words, she did not notice how she uttered her own. She looked at the prince with indignation and asked if he didn't want to have children with her. Alexandra looked intently at her husband and did not understand how she could utter such words. She looked at him and realized that his gaze was too cold. The principal was confused. He did not understand what had happened. Cleo didn't understand why she thought he didn't want her child. He said it wasn't that he didn't want to. Alexandra bowed her head and said that she thought he didn't like the idea. She thought he would say he would try his best. He looked at her and told her that she couldn't get pregnant just because she wanted to. He said that if she wanted to have a child, he would do everything in his power. The prince looked at her and said that he was just worried as it might be too burdensome for her. His kindness really bothered her. She felt a pressing pain in her chest. She perfectly remembered the day when he gave the order to execute her. She clearly remembered the hatred that she then felt towards him. The prince looked at his wife and asked, by chance, if he had misled her. He looked at her and asked for forgiveness. He said he was wrong. Emotionally, she rushed into his arms. She asked him for forgiveness with an innocent smile. She said that she was very tired and that may be why she became more sensitive. Alexandra looked at him and said that she wanted children, but not now, because if she got pregnant, she would not be able to enjoy her honeymoon. They say such words. She understood that she looked very stupid. Alexandra looked at him and said that she was just very worried, because she was afraid that suddenly he would not want to have children at all. Alexandra knew that it didn't matter to her whether he wanted a child or not. Her hatred towards him and his betrayal did not come from me. The prince looked at his wife and said with a smile that he would really like to see similar children as soon as possible. Looking into her beautiful eyes, he said that he would not like to place too much on her shoulders. He looked at her and asked if she understood what he meant. Alexandra said with a warm smile that she understood everything. He hugged her and told her not to worry about anything and to calm down, because he loved her very much. Alexandra knew that she had to control herself. She responded by saying that she loved him too. But a terrible hatred raged in her heart. That day, along with her life, her love disappeared. Despite the fact that they were married, they spent time together. She knew that these were the rules of the imperial palace, but she also knew that this was a very good option for her. Alexander looked at the maid and asked what His Majesty's plans were for today. The maid smiled and said that he had fencing lessons in the morning, and after lunch, cultural classes. Alexandra said with sadness in her voice that it seems His Majesty is very busy. But in her heart, she was furiously glad that she would not be able to see him often. The emperor did not dare allow any of his 3 sons to take part in state affairs. He did this because he did not want unforeseen conflicts to arise at a stage when successors had not even been determined. However, he made sure that they received a proper education. Alexandra knew that if she were emperor, then she would first of all decide on a successor, and the other 2 princes would not receive any education. She began to believe that this was the best way to strengthen imperial power. Alexandra thought for a long time about what the emperor was thinking about. Alexandra looked at the maid and asked what her plans should be today. The maid said that she could do whatever she wanted. The maid looked at her mistress and said that they had received news of Lady Penelope's arrival this morning from the Marchioness Sieglinde. Alexandra was very happy about this news. She said that when the young lady arrives, she will need to be shown everything so that she can quickly get comfortable and get used to the new place. Alexandra said that the young ladies are so smart and won't take long to train. Alexandra knew that, first of all, that she had to do this and find someone who would share her revenge and be with her from beginning to end. She knew that in such a situation, the only one suitable for this person was Penelope. She knew that Lady Eloan was also a very good maid of honor, but they became friends a little later. She knew that knowing the future was undoubtedly a significant advantage, but she also knew that everything she experienced would not be the same as now. Alexandra was sitting by the window, and it was announced that Lady Penelope had arrived. The maid looked at her mistress and said that they had finished training her and she had settled her in the room. The maid asked if she could accompany her to her mistress. Alexandra looked at the maid and said that if she hadn't had lunch yet, she would like to have lunch with her on such a day. The maid hesitated. Alexandra in turn smiled and said that only today, since the first day is special. The maid smiled at her mistress one last time and said that she understood everything. But first, she wanted to bring the young lady to her mistress. Alexandra smiled at the maid and thanked her for her work. Alexandra knew that she did not need to underestimate her enemy who was in her first life. The maid brought the young lady to her mistress. Penelope greeted the princess with all courtesy and politeness after coming to her audience. Alexandra was glad to see the young lady and looked at her, smiling. She looked at the maid and greeted her as well. She said it was unusual to be greeted in this way. Alexandra knew that this was her faithful best friend. Alexandra looked at her friend, as she was very glad to meet her. She knew that this was the only friend she could trust. Alexandra looked at her friend and said with a smile that she had a lot of things she wanted her to do. Penelope was very glad that she could help her mistress. With a smile on her face, she asked the young princess what she could do to help, as she was ready to do anything to make her mistress happy. Alexandra looked at her friend and realized that she remained her most faithful friend, no matter what happened. Alexandra asked her to sit down with her and enjoy the meal. The young maid did not want to embarrass her mistress with her presence, but Alexandra insisted on her own. She furiously wanted her to help her take revenge. Penelope and Alexandra were eating. Alexandra looked at the childish, contented expression on her maid's face and was amazed. Alexandra looked at her maid and said that she would like to ask her for something, if that's okay, of course. Penelope was surprised, but she said that she was completely at her service. Alexandra looked at the maid and said that she needed her help. She asked if she could find out anything about distant relatives of the imperial family. Alexandra knew that her goal was to make Cleo emperor and then betray him and become empress. She knew why a person who became an emperor could experience the most terrible pain. Alexandra furiously wanted to take away the crown that he would wear from her husband. She furiously wanted to turn his familiar world upside down and put the crown on another man. She wanted to give him the pain of renunciation and betrayal. She knew that he would not be able to bear such intense pain. Alexandra knew that in order to achieve her goal, she needed help. She passionately wanted to find a man who would want to become emperor and at the same time be faithful to her until the very end. Penelope was surprised because she did not understand why Alexandra needed distant relatives of the imperial family. Alexandra said with a smile that Penelope should look for information on guys between the ages of 16 and 29, and they should not be married. Alexandra did not want to risk involving unnecessary people in her revenge plan. She asked if she understood everything. Penelope said that she would definitely study this issue soon and make a detailed list for the lady. Alexandra looked at her maid and thanked her with warmth in her voice. Alexandra's face changed in an instant, and looking at the maid, she said that what they had just discussed should remain a secret. She said that no one should know about such a request. Penelope was surprised and asked if no one should know about this. Alexandra looked at her and said that no one should know, neither the imperial palace nor her parents, in search of such information, and most importantly, her husband should not know. Penelope was surprised that even the third prince should not know about this. Alexandra looked at her and said that no one except yours should know about this. Alexandra looked at the young lady and with a smile told her to remember all her words to the smallest detail, and she also asked if she understood everything. Penelope put on her face for a moment and said that she understood everything and would do everything immediately. The young maid asked the lady when the deadline was. Alexandra looked at her and said that she needed information as soon as possible and as much as possible, so that there would also be a lot of details. After some time, Penelope brought back all the information she could collect. Alexandra was surprised, as there was a lot of information. Penelope looked at her mistress and said that she had ordered her to study this issue in as much detail as possible. Penelope said that while she was looking through all the materials, she was very amazed because she could not believe that the imperial family was so big. Alexandra said she was also surprised. She couldn't understand how she managed to study everything so quickly and thoroughly. Everyone was listed on paper in order of blood relationship with the emperor. Penelope smiled at her mistress and said that it took her a little time to do everything secretly. Alexandra smiled and thanked her for such a well-done job. Penelope was very glad that she was able to please the mistress, leaving the mistress with a smile on her face. Alexandra stayed and began to carefully study information about all the emperor's relatives. She reviewed all the documents, since there were drawings of men and authentic information in the smallest detail about their lives. After studying the information, she did not believe that there could be so few suitable candidates. She knew that her country highly valued blood relationships. She knew that she could not stray too far from the emperor to find a new emperor. Alexandra knew that she needed exactly the candidate who would prove her abilities and competence superior to the blood relations of the three heirs. She knew that if she found a suitable candidate, he would be able to suppress the position of the nobility. She looked at all the information in the wrong way and continued to review candidates in search of the right person. She knew that she needed to find the right person as quickly as possible in order to begin her plan. Lacus Breodine Ornis is the man she buried in her past life. He was the emperor's cousin. Cleo's cousin. She knew that, unlike Cleo himself and his cousins, who spent their entire lives in the vicinity of the capital, the young man was an unusual child. He led the border territories, and at one time he was in the south of the empire. Over time, the reasons why the young man was sent to such territories were clarified. However, people differed in their opinions. Since he had his father's blood in him, most believed that it was affiliation and patriotism, a desire to protect the empire from external forces. But Alexandra thought differently. Although she had met him twice in her life, she saw in him the kind of person who uses any means and methods to achieve his goals. Alexandra saw in his eyes exactly the same look as in hers, as if he was going to bite her throat. Alexandra reviewed all the candidates again. She knew who she should choose. The young man fit all the criteria. His age was 26 years old. His father died in the war when the young man was still in the womb. Since he was born without a father, he scrambled for life and achieved all his goals on his own. From an early age, he excelled in fencing and had a brilliant mind. The future is still a 14-year-old youth, inheriting command of the house from his parents. And now he lived in the county with bated breath. Alexandra did not understand why he lived so aloof. She knew that when she first saw his eyes, she saw in them that he was definitely not the man who was content with only one defense. She realized at that moment that he was undoubtedly dangerous. She knew that he was the one who should return to the empire and seize the throne. This was her assessment in the past, and that is why she sent him to the next world. But now her situation had changed. She no longer loved Cleo as before, and furiously wanted to take revenge on him for all the pain he had caused her. She knew that she needed an ally who was ambitious and smart. If her assessment was correct, he would turn out to be a very good ally. But she also wondered if she could make him disappear like before. Alexandra still remembered how much effort she spent to take his life. She looked for his weaknesses for a long time, and in the end, he was caught for treason. She knew that he died an innocent man. She knew that he was not that easy to deal with. He was pleased with such a capable and ambitious person. Alexandra knew that this time she should not make him her enemy. She threw all the documents with information into the fireplace. She knew there was no guarantee that he would approve of her proposal. She knew that if she refused from him, she would have to get rid of him quickly. Alexandra knew she had found someone who could help her, but now she had a problem. She didn't know how to approach him correctly. She stood and wondered what she should do. She had no idea how she could meet him. She went through many options for their meeting, but all of them were unsuitable. She heard a noise outside the door. The servants told her that Lady Daenerys wanted to see her. Alexandra was surprised because she did not expect such a visit. Alexandra knew that the opportunity given to her to return was something other than an inexplicable privilege to correct her past. A young lady came to her for an audience. The young lady greeted the princess and said that she was very glad to meet her. The young lady greeted the princess and said that her name was Daenalis Dalala El Linuas of the House of Linuas. The princess knew that she would take advantage of all the opportunities that were given to her. Alexandra looked at her companion with a smile and said that she did not like such greetings and asked if she didn't know about it. Alexandra knew that she and the girl did not have a close relationship, but they often exchanged words at social events. The young lady asked the princess for forgiveness. Since the first greeting was very important, she knew that even if the princess told her such things now, she could not say with complete confidence that she would not change her mind later. Alexandra looked at the young lady and really liked her attitude. She saw that the young lady tried to be polite to other people until the very end. The princess liked the way she maintained the necessary distance, maintaining intimacy, and carefully blocking anything that could spark a quarrel. Alexandra looked at her friend and said that she could do whatever she wanted there. Alexandra said with a smile that she didn't think it would be appropriate to shrink. The young lady thanked the princess and said that she really appreciated her concern. The young lady congratulated the princess on her marriage. She said that she had prepared a gift for her to celebrate her new status in the imperial family. She sincerely hoped that she would like it. Alexandra looked and said with a smile that the girl was the most sensitive and attentive of all, and she was completely sure that she would like the gift she was given. Alexandra opened the contents and was surprised at what she saw. Alexandra looked at her caller and asked if she understood correctly that this was a saucer with rats. The young lady said that in the Kingdom of Belgium, an object with a picture of a rat symbolizes happiness and homeliness. The young lady looked at the princess and said that she thought that other people would give expensive jewelry and dresses, and so she decided to prepare something special and unusual for the princess. The lady looked at the princess and said that if she didn't like the gift, then she would definitely bring something else. Alexandra, in turn, said that this was not necessary, since she liked the gift. Alexandra looked at her new friend and said that the gift was very original, and she really liked it. She thanked him for such an interesting gift. Alexandra said that such a gift was very interesting and would be remembered by her forever. She said that the image of the rats is so beautiful that it's even a pity to use dishes. The young lady looked at the princess and said that if she really liked it, she would send her more later. The princess was surprised, but with a smile, she said that her words were enough to make her happy. The young lady looked at the princess and said that it was not difficult for her. Alexandra looked at her friend and said that depending on whether a person does such a simple thing or not, his authority and reputation may change. The young lady said with a smile that she was grateful to the princess for thinking highly of her. The young lady said that valuing the right people is the only way to success. Alexandra smiled and said that she was truly right, and these were her principles. The young lady was surprised and told the princess that she was greatly overestimated. The princess looked at her opponent and said that in the imperial palace there are people like Lady, calm and taciturn, who have a better chance of surviving. The princess looked at her and said that she would really like to have just such a person next to her. The young lady was surprised and asked if the princess wanted her to be her maid of honor. Alexandra smiled and said that good intuition is one of her abilities. Alexandra said that it seemed that the young lady had never imagined this. Before her reincarnation, Alexandra did not make the lady her maid of honor, not because she didn't like her, but because she didn't trust people. But now, after reincarnation, she became a completely different person. She knew that the two servants close to her would be the only ones who could return her to the right path when she strayed from it. Alexandra knew that if in past lives she would have had such a lady as a friend, she would have warned her against excessive daydreaming and warned her to come to her senses. She knew that although she was quiet, she was a serious girl with a strong will. In addition, people close to power sometimes need someone to give them, even an unpleasant, but still a warning. The young princess realized this only after her death. She knew that among all the people, the most reliable person was none other than Lady Denalice. Alexandra looked at the young lady and said that she needed someone like her. She was calm and usually confident in handling the work of a human. She was confident that the lady was the one who would guide her when she went down the wrong path. The princess said that she sincerely needed someone who would not allow her to destroy herself. She knew that she could not miss such a chance for anything. Only Alexandra could remember the past, and only she could change the future. She looked at the princess and said that she spoke as if she had already suffered a terrible crash. Alexandra was surprised how accurately the young lady noticed what had happened in her life before. Alexandra looked at the girl and said that without a person like her, collapse could happen in the near future. The young lady did not understand what the princess was talking about. Alexandra looked at the young girl and asked if it was because she didn't like her. The girl looked at the princess and only asked why her. The young lady said that in the empire, there are many strong and honest ladies, and many more noble and worthy people than her. Alexandra looked at her and said that that's why she chose her, because she didn't understand anything. Alexandra looked at the girl and said that she was the only one who asked such questions. The lady was excited. Alexandra said that, among other things, she was the only one who knew Alexandra. Alexandra looked at the girl and said that if she allowed a stranger to be next to her and trusted her personal freedom, then she would not feel comfortable. Alexandra asked the girl if she needed time to think. The girl looked at the princess and said that she could not make a decision alone either. She added that she needed to go back and consult with her relatives. She asked if she could come back later to get her answer. Alexandra smiled a predatory smile and said that of course it was possible, and she would look forward to it. Alexandra looked at the young lady and said that she would always be here and would eagerly await her answer. Next, two young ladies came to her, and they, in turn, greeted her with the fact that she had become a princess of the imperial family. These were the two daughters of the Earl of Essex. Alexandra thanked them with a smile. According to rumors, Alexandra knew that the two sisters spoke too painfully and were very frivolous. She knew that they were simply gossips. The young ladies presented the princess with a gift. They looked at the princess and said that the gift, of course, was not the best, but they tried very hard when preparing it. One of the sisters said that recently, what kind of thing has become so popular in the capital? Alexandra was surprised and did not understand what kind of gift they gave her. One of the sisters was at a loss how the princess could not know about this. She came closer to her and said that now this is the most popular soft underwear in the capital. Alexandra was at a loss. For what purpose did they give her such an intimate gift? She knew that if they were in a close relationship, then she would thank them, but now they were just having a social meeting. And they only said hello a couple of times. She knew that they were terribly ill-mannered girls. She sincerely could not understand their intention. She politely thanked them for such an interesting gift. The girls were happy and said that it was a great honor for them, since they saw that she was very pleased with their gift. One of the sisters told the princess that her throat was a little dry and asked for a cup of tea. Alexandra found it very funny that they were even going to drink tea with her. The princess asked for forgiveness for the mistake and said that she had completely forgotten to offer them tea. While drinking tea, the sisters praised the delicious aroma and taste of the tea. One of the sisters looked at the princess and asked how she was living in the imperial palace. Alexandra looked at them with a smile and said that she was very comfortable and everything suited her. Alexandra looked at the young ones there and said that the princes, as well as their mothers, were very kind to her and compassionate. She said that their royal highnesses are very loving and respectful people. The princess said that she was more than confident that she would be able to spend time comfortably in the future. The girls looked at the princess and said that then they can be calm for her, since even her facial expression is very calm, and she seems to be quite happy with life in the imperial palace. The lovely ladies looked at the princess and asked if she had heard the rather interesting news. Alexandra was taken aback and asked what the news was. They said that the women's county had gone bankrupt. One of the sisters said that the countess spent a lot of money on points, and the last point was truly luxurious. The amount of spices she bought was amazing, and it even got to such a point that the countess became addicted to gambling and became bankrupt. The young ladies said that moneylenders were on the alert to snatch something valuable from the inheritance. They said that they were pleased with such good lands, and some nobles wanted to buy them. Alexandra knew that, in fact, the territory of the county is not the kind of land that can be sold at a bargain price. They were located directly close to the imperial capital and had good transport links, and the climate there was very good for farming. Alexandra thought about whether she should buy such good lands. One of the sisters asked the princess if she needed ladies-in-waiting. Alexandra was surprised by this question. The young lady looked up with a grin and said that they thought she would need a temporary one if she was going to spend time in the palace. She asked if the princess had thought about this. After such a question, Alexandra raised why the young ladies came to her. Alexandra looked at them and said that she had not thought about it yet, since it was only her first day in the palace. Alexandra knew that even if she were dying of boredom in the palace, she still would not want such people to be near them. She knew that they were very frivolous. Alexandra looked at them and said that she had not thought about it yet. The sisters looked at her and said that if these were the ladies-in-waiting, she would not accept and should inform them about it. Alexandra smiled and said that she would certainly tell them the news. But in fact, she knew that under no circumstances would she come to them. Alexandra was very tired and exhausted, since the two sisters were terribly talkative and exhausted her. Be that as it may, she kept thinking about how she could contact the young man. She knew that the area was very harsh, but it had very remarkable military strength. She knew there were plenty of places to train in the harsh climate. The knights trained to constantly push their limits, and this was the reason why the estate was different from other border areas. They never had any problems with intrusion from outside forces. The young knight furiously destroyed all the knights in his path. He was furious that until now no one could match his strength. He was furiously angry and did not understand how they would defend themselves with such meager abilities. He shouted at the young knights, and they, in turn, trembled with fear. The young man approached the man and asked him to fight him. The knight was shocked, as he did not expect to see his highness. The young man looked at the knight and said that they had not met for a long time. The knight was at a loss and asked if he was not busy. His Majesty said that he was, of course, busy, but this did not mean that he could miss the regular certification of the knights. What passes? Only once a month was the most important thing for him. Ritar looked at him and said that he would fight him and would not give him any concessions. His Majesty looked at the knight and said that if he tried to fight him with less than his full strength, then he would have to resign as commander. The knight looked at him and said that he understood everything and he was not going to do that. Attacked his opponent. He, in turn, skillfully repelled the attack and realized where the knight's weak point was. The young man skillfully fought off the attacks. The knight, in turn, was angry and did not understand how His Majesty could control the sword so deftly. The young man put his opponent in his place, and the knight put his sword to his throat. He was in shock and did not understand how he could be such a friend to return from his blows. The knight, in turn, thanked His Highness. However, he was ashamed of himself. The young man looked at the knight and said that you are ashamed because he fought well. The young woman said that the knight had improved his skills so well. The knight looked at His Majesty and said that he knew that what he sat in his office all day was a pure lie. The young man said that he does not need to work much since he is busy with other things, but still his abilities remain with him. The knight looked at the young man and asked him to put away his sword, as it was making him shake. The young man apologized to the knight and put his sword away. The young man once again told the knight not to be ashamed. The knight, in turn, said that there is no swordsman who would not be ashamed when he meets His Majesty in battle. The young man, look at the knights, said that this was not necessary because there was no one who could defeat him, at least in the Empire. He knew that the knight rightfully deserved respect for being able to withstand even a little against him. The knight looked at the young man and said that he was right without a shift. The young man looked at the knight and said that he was truly a wonderful swordsman. He asked him not to reprimand his knights for not beating him, since the young man said that there was no one in this city who could defeat such a knight. Their conversation was interrupted by a man's scream. They were in shock and did not understand what was happening. At all times he rushed to the young master. His Majesty looked at the young man and told the knight that this was his friend whom he valued very much, but not more than anyone else. The commander-in-chief looked at his master and asked if he needed to leave. The young man said that he needed to leave. The young man ran with all his might to his master. He fell before the master. His Majesty looked at his friend and said that it looked like he had run away as fast as he could. He was out of breath. His Majesty Lacus looked at the young man and said that he thought that he had taken care of all urgent matters. The young man could not catch his breath and talk normally with his master. The young man was excited and only managed to shout with the last of his strength that the counts had done it. Lacus was shocked and did not believe what he heard.